There's no question that Yellowstone National Park is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It has geysers that shoot hot water into the air, colorful pools filled with bacteria and awesome wildlife. But there's also a large volcano at its core that some believe could end all life on Earth. With so many stories circulating about the supposed dangers of the Yellowstone Supervolcano, it can be difficult to decipher fact from fiction. So today, we're going to be answering the most common questions about this famous volcano. I make science videos, and here are the top 10 things you didn't know about Yellowstone. At number 10, we have magma chambers. In addition to being the site of the largest active volcano in North America, Yellowstone is also home to one of the world's largest magma chambers. While scientists do not actually know how big the magma chamber is, because it hasn't been directly observed, they do know that it extends roughly 45 miles beneath the park. That's over 70 kilometers. To put that into context, that's roughly the distance between New York City and Boston. But while the chamber might be long, it's not very wide. It's estimated that the magma chamber is only about 3 miles across, which is roughly 5 kilometers. For reference, that's about the same width as 16 American football fields lined up side by side. Even though the magma chamber is huge, it's not actually big enough to erupt explosively and cause a mass extinction event. A recent paper published in Nature Communications suggests that even if the entire chamber were to melt, it wouldn't produce a giant eruption. Instead, it would result in an eruption of lava flows that would mostly stay within the park boundaries. Scientists say that such an event would likely have minimal impact outside the park, but it would still be pretty dangerous for those living nearby. According to the researchers, approximately 200,000 people would need to be evacuated from towns near the park. Lava would spill over US Highway 89 and eventually merge with the Snake River, destroying all life in its path. If you live in Idaho Falls or downstream along the Snake River, you probably don't want to be there when that happens. All told, about 13,000 square miles of land would be covered in lava. That's about 34,000 square kilometers. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the size of Belgium and the Netherlands combined. At number 9, we have earthquake activity. There's no doubt that earthquakes and volcanic eruptions are related. Volcanoes are often prone to earthquakes, and sometimes earthquakes can even trigger volcanic eruptions. This is because both processes occur when there's movement of tectonic plates. When tectonic plates move, stress builds up until it's released suddenly, whether that be in the form of an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. Yellowstone is located along the boundary of 3 different tectonic plates, the Pacific, North American, and Gorda plates. These plates meet at what is called a triple junction. Whenever these plates move past each other, it causes stress to build up in the Earth's crust. Sometimes this stress is released in the form of an earthquake. Most of the earthquakes that occur at Yellowstone happen deep underground, but they're still powerful enough to shake the ground around the park. In 1985, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck just outside Yellowstone National Park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. This was the largest earthquake to hit the area in almost 100 years. But despite the size of the quake, no damage was reported and no injuries were even. In fact, the last time Yellowstone experienced a major earthquake was in 1859. That year, a massive magnitude 7.2 earthquake shook the region, which back then was largely unsettled. Some reports from settlers described the quake as being the worst they had ever felt. Despite the intensity of the earthquake, there was no damage to buildings because there weren't any buildings to damage. The nearest jail, which was located 120 miles away, had its doors blown off their hinges. Nowadays, however, there are far more buildings and far more people in the area, so if an earthquake of similar magnitude were to strike today, it could be catastrophic. Thankfully, scientists don't think it's likely to happen anytime soon. They say that it could happen as early as next week or as late as next century. At number 8, we have volcanic history. Although Yellowstone has had periods of dormancy, it has been volcanically active for at least 2 million years. Over the past 2 million years, it has produced nearly 17,000 cubic miles of ash and lava. That's 70,000 cubic kilometers. To put that into perspective, that's enough material to cover the entire state of Texas in a layer of ash that's over 230 feet high. That's 70 meters. But even though Yellowstone has been highly active in the past, scientists think that its most explosive days are behind it. They say that the likelihood of a massive eruption is extremely low, especially over the next 10,000 years. According to the United States Geological Survey, there is about a 1 in 750,000 chance of a super eruption in the next 10,000 years. There is slightly more risk associated with a smaller eruption, but it's still relatively low. One scientist compared the risk of an eruption to that of being struck by lightning while simultaneously being hit by a meteor. While there may be little risk of a large eruption, there is still a chance of smaller eruptions. In fact, small eruptions happen fairly regularly. Between 1400 and 1700 CE, there were multiple eruptions of Mount Norris, which is part of the Yellowstone Supervolcano. These eruptions created new cones and changed the landscape of the park forever. While these eruptions are much smaller than the ones that formed the magma chamber, they still pose a threat to humans. In 1985, a small eruption occurred at a place called the Dragon's Mouth. This is a fumarole field located on the northern edge of the magma chamber. While there was no warning for the eruption, it did not pose a significant danger to humans. However, it was still the first eruption at Yellowstone in over 70 years. At number 7, we have the supervolcano myth. Yellowstone isn't technically a supervolcano. That's a term that's used to describe any volcano that has the potential to produce an eruption of magnitude 8 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. While Yellowstone certainly fits this description, the official name of the volcano is simply Yellowstone caldera. A caldera is a large crater that's formed by a volcanic eruption. The Yellowstone supervolcano consists of 3 calderas that are roughly 43 by 28 miles across. That's 69 by 45 kilometers. The 3 calderas are the result of 3 major eruptions that occurred during the Pleistocene epoch. The largest of the 3 craters is the result of the most recent eruption, which occurred about 640,000 years ago. This eruption ejected an estimated 2,500 cubic miles of ash and pumice. That's 10,000 cubic kilometers. While this was clearly a massive eruption, it was not technically a super eruption. It ranks as a 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. A super eruption is generally considered to be anything that ranks as an 8. At number 6, we have hot springs. You probably didn't know this, but you can actually bathe in water that's over 200 degrees Fahrenheit at Yellowstone National Park. But please don't. While it might sound relaxing, you'll likely die. It's illegal to bathe in any hot springs or geysers inside the park, and for good reason. The water can reach temperatures of over 275 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 135 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to burn your entire body in less than 1 second. But that doesn't mean that people haven't tried. In 1992, a man named Charles Moore infamously snuck into a restricted area and soaked in the boiling river. He lowered himself into the steaming water using a rope and spent 5 minutes enjoying the heat. After his dip, he climbed out and walked away without a backwards glance. As the river boiled, the man's footprints were quickly washed away. Authorities knew something had happened, but they didn't discover what it was until months later when someone found his car in the parking lot. They tracked down the owner and charged him with trespassing. Moore was sentenced to 6 months in jail and ordered to pay $1,000 in fines. At number 5, we have the Yellowstone super eruption. The most common fear surrounding the Yellowstone supervolcano is that it will blow its top and create a super eruption. If this were to happen, it would have disastrous consequences for the entire planet. First of all, the eruption column would emit a tremendous amount of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. This gas would reflect sunlight and cool the planet, potentially causing an ice age. The eruption would also eject huge amounts of ash and pumice, which would blanket North America in a layer of soot. The ash would block sunlight and disrupt weather patterns, leading to widespread crop failure. But perhaps the worst consequence of the eruption would be the pyroclastic flow. Pyroclastic flow is a fast-moving current of hot gas and volcanic matter that flows down the slopes of a volcano during an eruption. Pyroclastic flows can reach speeds of up to 430 miles per hour, that's 700 kilometers per hour. If there were a super eruption at Yellowstone, the pyroclastic flows would destroy everything in their path, killing millions of people in the process. Thankfully, scientists say that a super eruption is extremely unlikely to occur in the near future. At number 4, we have wildlife. Yellowstone is home to a variety of animals, including bison, elk, wolves, bears, and coyotes. But did you know that there's also a population of endangered grizzly bears living in the park? There are an estimated 700 grizzly bears in Yellowstone, which makes up about 1/3 of the total grizzly bear population in the lower 48 states. Grizzlies are typically found in mountainous regions of the western United States and Canada. They are well adapted to their environment and are able to thrive in a variety of habitats, from dense forests to open meadows. In Yellowstone, grizzlies primarily eat berries, insects, and fish. They will also occasionally eat larger mammals, including bison and elk. Grizzlies are important members of the Yellowstone ecosystem. They help to keep the population of herbivores in check, and their presence helps to maintain the health of the forest. At number 3, we have Native American legend. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge that the land now known as Yellowstone National Park has been inhabited by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. The first inhabitants of the Yellowstone region were the ancestors of the modern Crow, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota tribes. These tribes lived in the Yellowstone Basin for centuries, hunting bison and other animals for food. They also fished in the rivers and collected berries and other plants for food. The tribes had a deep respect for the land and its resources, and they developed sustainable ways of living that allowed them to thrive for generations. When European settlers began to encroach on the Yellowstone territory, the tribes fought back. But eventually, they were forced to sign treaties that ceded their land to the U.S. government. Today, the tribes continue to fight for the return of their ancestral lands. They argue that the U.S. government has a moral obligation to return the land because it was taken without their consent. Whether or not the tribes will ever get their land back remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, the Yellowstone Supervolcano holds great cultural significance for these tribes. At number 2, we have global warming. According to a new study published in the journal Quaternary Science Reviews, global warming may lead to increased volcanic activity in the Yellowstone Supervolcano. The study's authors say that rising temperatures could destabilize the region's fault lines, resulting in more earthquakes. This could potentially trigger an eruption of the supervolcano. However, it's important to note that this is just one of several studies that have been conducted on the relationship between climate change and volcanic activity. The results of these studies are often conflicting and inconclusive. Some studies have found a correlation between warmer temperatures and increased volcanic activity, while others have found no such correlation. It's possible that the relationship between climate change and volcanic activity is complex, and that it varies depending on the specific volcano. More research is needed to better understand the potential risks of climate change on volcanic activity. But it's clear that we need to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, at number 1, we have Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone National Park is one of the most popular national parks in the United States. Every year, millions of tourists visit the park to see its geysers, hot springs, and wildlife. But few know that the park is also home to a supervolcano. The Yellowstone Supervolcano is one of the largest volcanoes in the world. If it were to erupt, it would cause massive damage to the surrounding area. But don't worry, scientists say that the chances of it erupting anytime soon are very low. So you can rest assured that your trip to Yellowstone National Park will be safe. Probably. That's all for this episode. See you next time.